Invisible, subtle energy occurs around us all the time and is measurable by science.
We had noticed a lot of people showing us photographs from megalithic sites that disproportionately often seem to have these balls of light in there, usually flash photos.
Orbs are often written off as dust or other particles in the air, but that does not change the fact that they seem to occur more often in particular places at particular times.
At Tikal, at the top of the most energetic pyramid that we found down there, we took a lot of flash photos during the course of our 8-hour stakeouts, which would run from roughly 3 a.m. till 11 a.m. And on the pyramids that were electrically dead, that had no juice, nothing going on, which were the big fancy ones, but the most recently built ones, we would take photos and find out eventually when they were developed, no orbs, no glowing balls of light. But on the oldest pyramid down there, where we did work and got all kinds of results, that was 1,200 years older than the big fancier ones. In that case, the photography we got back from our own simple flash cameras, they were literally choking the screen with these balls at the period at which the air had its highest in electrical charge. And on the strongest day down there, I was recording electrical charge higher than I've recorded even in thunderstorms back home. We don't know what orbs are, but our personal guess is that they're balls of ionized or electrified air that will tend to hang together. A good analogy would be ball lightning, where it's simply so electrified that the molecules are excited enough to glow.
Other evidence shows that there is energy occurring naturally everywhere on the planet that our science knows about but seems to ignore. Nikola Tesla sought to provide the world with free wireless electricity for everybody on Earth. He discovered that electricity occurred naturally throughout the Earth's atmosphere and ground. The telluric currents in the ground that John Burke discussed, and the electricity present in the ionosphere in the atmosphere, which is ionized by the sun. He also created and developed ways to harness those energies.
Tesla, who teach Nikola Tesla to get to that power of electricity? And he didn't invent it, it's already there, but he know how to use it. And not only that, he did not take an advantage like Mr. Edison.
Tesla wanted to harness the natural energy that exists everywhere on Earth and make it free to the public. Edison endeavored to produce and distribute electricity by creating a regulated monopoly for profit.
He became rich and the people more light into their home. Yeah, so Nikola Tesla, he's the one think of how to use this energy.
Between 1901 and 1917, the Tesla Tower was built on Long Island as a wireless broadcasting system for telephone and electrical signals. Interestingly, it was constructed on an aquifer with descending passageways and tunnels beneath it. At the time, few understood how it worked. Tesla's funding was ultimately dropped by J.P. Morgan because Tesla wanted the wireless electricity to be free, and therefore J.P. Morgan couldn't make a profit. So even though Tesla's genius was seen by many, he was still driven into obscurity. The energy to create free wireless energy has always existed on our planet, and still exists today.
And it's not only energy on our planet, there's plenty. Rivers are flow by energy. Tsunami is energy. Frequencies are energy. If we have the electricity now, it's based on explosion energy. Now, the sound energy based on a technology different from the explosion energy, and it's known as implosion energy.
This energy was not the kind of energy that we have that pollutes. It was a completely passive energy that had no byproducts.
The energy we use today is generated by combustion and is non-renewable. It is called explosion energy and leaves exhaust and pollution.
Our system all over the planet today is based on the explosion energy. That's why the petrol is too expensive.
In contrast, implosion energy, like solar panels and wind power, is clean and renewable. We are beginning to realize that we need sustainable energy.
Implosion energy, very simple. All what you need is the beam of the sun on a running water. Not just running in a straight line, but in a zigzag. And that's, you find all the tunnels are in a zigzag form for such a purpose.
In addition to the limestone aquifers underneath the pyramids, there is evidence of a network of man-made tunnels.
As a boy, when I'm living in my house, which is a few hundred yards away from the nose of what we call the Sphinx Tefnuti, this was my playing yard, and I know tunnels. I walked in these tunnels, I swim in these tunnels, I crawl in these tunnels, and I know that this is one way of creating energy. Now this is cost nothing. I mean, all what you need is a beam of the sun reaching the running water underneath the tunnel, and you can see that there are many openers in each tunnel permit this sun beam reach the water. And when it does, then the energy is there. Energy is not just to run your car, or it's run the people, feed the people.
If the pyramid fields of the Band of Peace and the network of underground tunnels are still there, why don't they generate energy the way they used to?
In the condition of the pyramids now, stripped of those smooth insulating outer casings, it's going to leak electrical air about as well as a car radiator radiates heat. I mean, it's almost perfectly designed to weaken that, and yet still you get these reports of people like Siemens, who was one of the pioneers of electricity, and he's an Englishman. There's even a unit of electrical, I believe, resistance named after him called the Siemens. He was on top of the Great Pyramid, I think, during the 1880s, and they began to notice that when his Arab guides stood up and spread his fingers, they'd hear a ringing. And when he closed them, you wouldn't. And he stood up, and he could sense the literal electricity in the air. And on the spot, he improvised an instant Leyden jar, which is one of the earliest things they used to use to store electric charge. And he did it by opening a wine bottle, wetting some newspaper, wrapping the wet newspaper around the glass wine bottle, and holding the wine bottle up above his head until sparks started to issue from the wine bottle. And at that point, his Arab guides started accusing him of things like witchcraft. They got into a physical struggle, and he accidentally touched one of the guides with the charged wine bottle, and it knocked the man to the ground and unconscious for a short period, after which they took off down the pyramid. But there was, in other words, a professional scientist familiar with electricity in its rudimentary but accurate forms, sensing exactly that, even in this ruined condition that the pyramid's in today. Yeah.
If you come to the Egyptian Museum, there is an item over there known as the schist disc, found by Dr. Walter Emery, and he said, or he thinks that it could be a vase for a lotus flower. No.
The schist disc was found at Saqqara in a burial chamber that no one is allowed to visit. Other goods found in the chamber were simple ropes, pottery, and grains. The disc shows clear evidence of sophisticated technology in the way it was built, and it seems out of context with the rest of the grave goods. Is this the original context for this artifact? Or is it possible that it has had a long journey over the last several millennia, and this just happened to be its final resting place? Look at this hollow stone tube. It looks as though the schist disk could fit over it. It would take sophisticated instruments to shape the tube so precisely. How did they do it?
To cut the stone. This is by a sonic cut with no metal instruments like bronze chisel or this. No, it's another stone. And this other stone, it's the hardest stone you can find, which is the diamond.
There are pieces of stone lying around that show concave shapes that actually have the machine tooling marks on it. The evidence of the high technology is right in front of us.
Look again at these quartz objects. Aside from their unique and amazing shapes, could they have had another purpose? Today, quartz crystal is used as the basis of all kinds of modern technology. It is most commonly used in crystal oscillators. Technology uses oscillating frequencies from tiny quartz crystals that vibrate at certain speeds, with a signature vibration for each device. AM/FM radios, CDs and DVDs, computer processors and Ethernet rely on quartz crystals. Could it be that the ancients were tapping into this technology and using it on a much larger scale, in a way we can only begin to imagine? Of course, we can't say for certain, but based on what we've seen, we can theorize. Energy can be created and manipulated in many ways. It is the lifeblood of a civilization, and therefore an important resource.
In Egypt, there are 67 constructions all along the Nile like sails. And for those who has the eye, they can tell from the shape of that construction. The straight form of angles, that is a pyramid or a construction for energy, a plant for energy. That's what we have.
A theory that's always struck me, that they were intended actually to somehow or another spiritualize the whole civilization. In other words, to provide a widespread, high level of energy that people needed because a descending age was upon them.
And I believe what the pyramid and other certain other structures were constructed for was to basically act as a kind of the equivalent of the street light. You know, if you're in a neighborhood that's maybe not the nicest neighborhood, and it gets dark at night, you like to have bright lights go on. And that's effectively what the Great Pyramid was. Now, these were not lights that illuminated it so that people could see where they were going. It was basically a device, a generator for, if you will, broadcasting and transmitting throughout the planetary structure a type of field which uplifted the entire humanity.
And maybe those pyramids were built in some sense or another to stay the decline. Let's call them in some sense or another spiritual granaries designed to somehow store an emotional or spiritual or psychological or some sort of energy that was needed to keep people from becoming the total barbarians that they subsequently became.
We had the ability to basically prop up humanity for a while using the system, but what we saw was the street light eventually went out.
The original knowledge got lost, and the later builders were building them out of ego. They were monuments to the king, if you will, but they were no longer engines that could help feed their people.
Catastrophes around the world damaged, or if you will, decommissioned some of these sites. So some of them went offline, just like a power plant going offline.
I tend to wonder if the few people who knew the secrets to the energy connection with those pyramids didn't die off. If it was a thin chain of, for example, a shaman to his apprentice, and if the wrong people get killed at the right time, that chain is broken, that knowledge gets lost.
As long as we think we are more advanced than we've ever been, we are blind to technology based on subtle energies.
It's not fair also. It's not fair to deny what you can see and touch by your own hand. This is all needed, a technique, and we have that technique still. But nobody wants to listen.
Why were the ancients so interested in the motion of the stars? Why was cosmology sacred to the ancients? Pondering the history of ancient Egypt, we typically think of the mysteries of the pyramids and the grandeur of the temples. But where did it all start? Do we know how long ago the ancients began tracking the stars? Could there be lost worlds buried beneath the sands? Cosmology is the study of the universe in its totality. We think of cosmology as science, whereas the Egyptians considered it sacred.
There's one thing we know about ancient Egypt for certainty, is that they observed the star Sirius. And we are sure when they speak of that star.
Everything that comes out of the ancient world has to have a spiritual and metaphysical base.
The ancients, and the ancient Egyptians in particular, but probably ancient civilizations more generally, saw themselves, humanity, us, as tied in with the bigger environment, the cosmos, the bigger picture.
They built monuments and they aligned them. But what for? And do their belief systems have validity today?
If we want to decode Egyptian symbolism, we should look for clues in the ancient language that Hakim learned as a child from his elders, living along the Band of Peace. Looking at the many images left by the Egyptians, we have assumed that they were obsessed with death. Turning to the ancient Suf language, however, we learn that they didn't even have a word for death. They called it westing.
We have no word of death in our culture. No word death. And to express this operation of death, we say westing. You know, going towards west, like the sun rises from the east, and it's westing. So there is no word of death here. We believe in resurrection. If the sun sets in the west, the resurrection happens in the next day when the sun rises in the next day. So the deceased believe that it's just like the sun.
The Egyptians obviously had a very different worldview from ours today. They believed in the afterlife and the soul's immortality.
Was it possible at all that they had found some sort of science of immortality, for example, we call it? As crazy as it may seem, they seem to be very, very convinced that they knew how to send the king to his cosmic world. Those stellar gods, of whom the king believed that he himself would become one stellar god after his death, constructed monuments and performed rituals that mimic the events that they saw in the sky. It sounds against all the tenets of our scientific beliefs, but we have to see why they were so convinced. The ancient Egyptians perceived the land as a cosmic environment, that it followed the activities of the sky because they believed them to be running in parallel. And they had reasons to believe that. One of the main reasons was the cycles of the Nile. The Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, and it performed a cycle which followed the cycle of the sun and the stars. It's not surprising at all that they associated the reappearance of the stars with the rebirth of the Nile. Essentially, this star religion, if you like, boiled down to one important aspect, that it somehow could help the king become a spiritual being and return to the cosmic world in a specific place with Orion and so forth. How they thought they were going to do it is by looking very, very carefully at what happened to the stars. And the stars perform an annual cycle, but those of Sirius and Orion give us a curious cycle in that they disappear, or they appear to disappear. But if you watch a star over the course of the year, you'll find that there comes a time when it is very low in the west at time of sunset. So the sun sets, and as it gets dark, the star appears just for a few seconds over the west. If you come the next day, you will not see that star. And for 70 days or so, the star has gone. It seems to have gone under the earth. But after those 70 days, it appears by this time at dawn, rising just before the sun, which we call the heliacal rising, whereas the Egyptians call it the rebirth of the star. So in their mind, something happened. In their mind, the star went in the underworld, stayed in the underworld for 70 days, and then by magic popped up again, was reborn again in the east. That's the pyramid text. The pyramid texts mimic this cycle.
At the ancient site of Saqqara, we find the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious texts in the world. Covering the inner walls of these small pyramids are thousands of hieroglyphs showing knowledge of celestial mechanics and cycles of time. Although we've come a long way in our understanding of hieroglyphs, it is possible that many layers of meaning in the symbols remain hidden. Until now. When we approach hieroglyphics, we do so from our own point of view, and we assume that the letters of our alphabet correspond with certain hieroglyphs. There are 4,000 Egyptian hieroglyphs, but only 26 letters. In order to crack the code, we need to open our minds to different levels of meaning.
I think it's just familiarity with the way modern languages work. No one expects that a word would work differently. Our mindset is that a letter is the carrier of a phonetic value and that a word is the carrier of a concept. To understand the Egyptian words, you have to start from the approach that the letter is the carrier of the concept and the word is an extended sentence. There are nuances of meanings to the words that you don't get if you don't understand what the individual glyphs mean. For instance, there's an Egyptian word that is translated as diving duck, but when you read the glyphs it really reads pool of water, place of diving duck.
In 1822, French scholar Jean-François Champollion and British scientist Thomas Young deciphered the hieroglyphics from the Rosetta Stone. The stone was created in 196 BC. It showed the same text in hieroglyphic, Greek, and Demotic Egyptian on the one tablet. Scholars have used Champollion's translations as the basis for deciphering hieroglyphs. Could Champollion have missed subtleties or even withheld some information?
One biographical study of Champollion said that he delayed for a a very long period of time before producing his translation, because in the words of the study, he clung stubbornly to the idea that an Egyptian glyph might mean something more than just a phonetic value.
Laird Scranton is a computer software engineer who has interpreted a new aspect of hieroglyphics.
Basically, Egyptian hieroglyphic words work more like an acronym in English, like the phrase FYI, or an acronym such as CIA or CBS, where anyone who reads English understands that you don't try to pronounce this word. This is not a word that you're going to read for its meaning in terms of the letters all put together. It's one letter at a time, stands for one word at a time, and you put the words together to get the meaning.
If we think of each hieroglyphic word as an acronym, rather than having a phonetic value, a new layer of interpretation appears. Hieroglyphs reveal in symbolic terms the way the ancient Egyptians thought the universe works.
I can show that certain key glyph shapes came out of cosmology, which describes how the universe was created. Okay, and because the shapes came out of cosmology, it makes sense that the meanings that attach to the shape are associated with cosmology also. They would have meanings related to the creation of the universe. Once we agree that the sun glyph means what it means, and that's all traditional meanings, it's hard to argue that the word month doesn't say the moon makes an orbit. Or it's hard to argue that the word year doesn't say time of the Earth's orbit around the sun.
The ancient Egyptians were almost obsessive keepers of records. And one thing that they observed most was the celestial objects. We'd expect them to pay attention and record. Now, how far back? That's a big question. Well, we now have some sites that go at least 6,000 to 7,000 years before. There's a megalithic site that has been found in the early 70s, but not understood until lately, that has astronomical alignments. And strangely, the astronomical alignments that it has are precisely the ones you find in the Pyramid Age. So Orion, Sirius, the summer solstice, they're all there. It's no more theory. We have evidence that they did it.